Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Victor Perez Colonia. I'm part of our asset management business unit. And today we have another one of our ServiceNow live events, this time focused around SAP and the software license compliance equation. Thank you, everybody, for joining. If you haven't already joined some of these events in the past, we put a lot of these events on, covering different areas of our product, different areas of the platform, and our particular group focuses around software asset management, hardware asset management, and cloud insights. We're going to throw a link in the chat here where you can register for other future events. And before we do get started, a quick couple of announcements. First and foremost, the information we may provide here is privileged and confidential, as well as some of the information that we answer on the Q&A session or display in product may be forward-looking in nature. So just keep that in mind as you work with us through today's session. All right. So a big welcome to everybody. Again, this is our commitment to all of our customers to help drive adoption and achieve value faster with your investments in ServiceNow. We're going to focus today's session on understanding the software license equation, and we're going to use SAP as our case study. And to do that, I brought on my team to join me. You have probably heard about me, and you probably have heard about Michael. We lead these events for the outbound team here at the Asset Management Business Unit. But you may or may not have heard of Akash. Akash is our PM who leads our SAP product feature set, and he has all the wealth of knowledge around our publisher pack for SAP. So Akash, thanks for making the time. Appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Victor.
So here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover three areas. We're going to talk about the software license equation. We're going to set it up. What is it to be in compliance with your software asset management program? But then we're going to look at SAP, looking at the product overview. What do we cover from a license metric standpoint? How do you configure that within SAM? And then some nuances around licensing. And at the end of this, Akash is going to walk us through different ways to optimize our SAP configuration so that we're not wasting any of our software consumption spend. As always, put your questions and comments in the chat. And we have a Q&A form that we're going to read off all the questions at the end of the session. A couple other quick takeaways for those of us in the audience. Let's stay laser focused on the topic of the day. If you have comments to share, again, use the chat feature. If you have questions, use the Q&A form. We're going to have a quick survey at the end of the session where we do want your feedback so that we can keep putting on these events. And if you have anything to contribute, again, use the comment feature. We'll read those off during the course of the event here, and we might reference some of those during the Q&A. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. We have a big event today here. Let's start with the software license compliance equation. So Akash, when I think of this, I'm really thinking about licenses and software consumption. Can you help us understand what is the goal behind the software license compliance equation, and why is it an equation? I guess is a better question.
Sure. Just like, all of our other software publisher packs, all the other, kind of software that you're going to be tracking from an asset management perspective, you want to identify what you've purchased versus what you're using within the organization. On the SAP side, it's no different. We're going to take a look at what we've purchased from SAP on the entitlements, and then what is our software consumption as far as named user licenses, any engine measurement licenses, things like that. That's going to be our software consumption. And then we're going to be able to see on an ongoing basis where we are from a license position perspective. Are we over licensed? Are we under licensed? Are we doing fairly well? And be able to have those insights on an ongoing basis versus once a year when you're doing your true up and your audits and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so this is it's almost like that point in time snapshot, right, of what you own versus what you're using, and are you over or under, like you mentioned. Yep. So the end result being that effective license position, there's a couple of different scenarios where you make that comparison and you might have different outcomes. Could you talk a little bit about those? I see that you have there true up, buy more, and optimize. What's the differentiation?
Yeah, no different than anything else that we do. Once we know where we are from a license position, with SAP, it's a little different where you're going to need to send that information to SAP, but they're going to identify, the true up value. What are you using, and do you need to buy more, or stay current with your current license position, or are you going to need to purchase additional named user licenses, or engine measurement licenses, and things like that. And then from an optimization standpoint, again, if we're able to see these insights on an ongoing basis, do we have any sort of named users that are assigned to inactive users? Do we have any locked out users and things like that? Something that can help us optimize and get us ready for when we do have to do that overall audit.
Yeah. I guess the best way to kind of summarize what you said there is you could either be over licensed, where you have more entitlements than software installations, or under licensed, where you have less entitlements than software installations. The former, being over licensed, is not a bad place to be, right? It gives you ability to optimize, like you said, or grow your business using the entitlements that you already own.
Yeah, and again, on the SAP side, we're not really looking necessarily around installations, but
Yep.
From a software asset management perspective, yeah, in typical software, exactly right. On the buy more, when you need to buy more, obviously you're going to be under. You have less rights available, and so when you do that true up, or when you have to go purchase more just to make sure you're within compliance. But if you're over licensed, that's not a great thing, in the sense of we're just spending too much money on that
Correct.
particular software. So where can we reduce that overall spend?
Yeah, nice. So you can take actions on both ends of the spectrum, if you will.
For sure.
So let's look at how this kind of translates into SAM. So this is how SAM works, right? Maybe we can jump through some of these and overlay where entitlements and software consumption goes, and then effective license position. But for those of us that haven't seen this slide in the past, Akash, how does SAM work? How would you explain this to somebody?
Yeah, so with just SAM Pro on the ServiceNow platform, basically we have our software assets, our entitlements. So those are going to be the purchases that you've made, and then we're going to bump that against the inventory that we're getting from our different discovery sources, or integrations in the case of SAP. So that's your software consumption, and so that is going to go through the content service. It's going to normalize a lot of that data for us. And then we're going to get to a point where we have the ability to reconcile and see where we are from a compliance standpoint, where we are from what we've bought versus what we're using, on whatever software we're looking at. In the case of SAP, what are we using that we've integrated through the ABAP program and bringing into ServiceNow? We can see what we're using on the SAP side. So that's where we're going to identify some of that compliance in our license positions. And from there, you're hoping to be able to take some sort of action. So we have optimization dashboards and so on and so forth that will allow us to identify, what are some low-hanging fruit that we can go and we can help optimize. And then where are we from a named user license perspective? Are there any optimizations from a role-based optimization or transaction-based optimization? And that would be within your action.
Awesome. No, thanks for clarifying that and bringing in that equation into how the engine here works. I appreciate that. All right, let's get to the meat of everything. SAP. Walk us through kind of an overview. What do we support today? What are some license metrics, and how can we think about SAP within ServiceNow?
Sure. So as far as what we support, our main areas that we support today are from engine measurement. So gathering those different engine measurements from your multiple systems that you have, those clients, gathering that data as well as your named user types. So named user licensing. We do get a lot of that data directly from a content perspective, directly from SAP, as far as the measurement IDs, as well as all the different named user types and things like that. So all of that data is gathered through the SAP from a content perspective, and then we capture that data via our ABAP program deployed in SAP for your individual instances, for your individual SAP deployments. We bring that in through the integration, and then that's where we would be able to do create those entitlements, identify any license position and optimizations. So we do role-based optimization, transaction-based optimizations today, and then we identify different what we consider low-hanging fruit, inactive users, users without a named user assignment, locked out users, things like that.
Awesome. And I saw there that you also support S/4HANA and self-declaration. Any comments around that?
Yeah, so as far as the S/4HANA, we support like the ECC applications as well as S/4HANA. The self-declared, that kind of goes back to our engine measurement, but we, not just the measured data that we get from SAP, we also allow you to enter in those self-declared measurements as well, self-declared usage as well.
Okay, yeah, so it gives you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to mapping out all your license consumptions. All right, so you mentioned the ABAP program. Let's talk a little bit about that, because there's some nuances around configuring SAP within SAM. So maybe we can spend a little bit of time there.
Sure. So with our ABAP program, you're going to download that from the ServiceNow store and deploy that within on the SAP side. We do have, and I think you have it here as well. We do have a installation guide for that, where you're going to create that user and associate roles and so on and so forth for the ServiceNow system to be able, or ServiceNow user to be able to gather that information from your multiple systems. And then we store it into a now table namespace on the SAP side. Once you've deployed that, we can go ahead and create the SAP connection on the ServiceNow side. So within ServiceNow, there's an SAP connection table. You'll go ahead and create that profile, identify a mid server if you're going to use a mid server. And then from there, we can go ahead and run the test, and then you can do your initial refresh of data from the multiple systems, and then pull that into ServiceNow. So there's a couple links there that allow you to do that. Once we've brought in that data, that's when you want to start utilizing the software models that were created and utilize those models to create the software entitlement. So it's similar to, kind of our SaaS software models that get created if we're doing some sort of SaaS integration, where you want to utilize the software models that are being created through that integration and not necessarily create them ahead of time, which is what we recommend doing with other type of publishers and entitlements and so on and so forth. So this one goes against the grain a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really key distinction there, right? So just as a general term, on-prem licensing, we normally say create your entitlements using a publisher part number. That's going to automatically create the software model, and then that'll get linked to the software installation or product. From a SaaS perspective, we kind of say the opposite. We say set up your API integration to pull in data. SAM will create the software model automatically, and then you associate the entitlement. So on one hand, you're going from left to right. On the other hand, you're going from right to left. What you're saying here is SAP follows that right to left format. Set up the ABAP program, bring in the data. SAM will automatically create the software models, and then you create the entitlements. I think that's a very, very key takeaway when it comes to SAP configuration.
That's correct. And the reason for that is we look up that named user license in their content, generate that model correctly. We look up the license metric that we're getting from SAP, generate those models correctly. And so you're guaranteed that those models have been created correctly, and you're going to be able to reconcile against them going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're using some sort of unique identifier to harvest the right information out of the content library to create the software model.
That's correct.
Great.
And then step 4, right, is reconciling, and then taking a look at any of the optimization items that you will see in the optimization dashboard. So we also identify any possible indirect access, which we'll talk about later. Things like that. There's some different data points that you can take a look once you've run reconciliation against the SAP data.
Yeah. Okay, great. So when you do have it set up and configured, it should look something like this diagram that we're going to show, right? Where you have the ABAP module, it's bringing in the data. It may go through a mid server, and then it gets kicked over into ServiceNow. Anything else you think you should comment here, Akash, that makes sense for our audience?
Yeah, to be honest, like what we're doing here is we're deploying that in your solution manager or central system. And then it's going to go query all the different systems. We are bringing in, based off of your RFC connections, we are bringing in different, whether it's development, production, test, we are bringing in all of those systems. But then as we see, going forward, when we reconcile that for engines, we're really just looking at production. And then for your named user licensing, we're looking at dev and production. Mostly so.
Okay. A quick question here that I didn't ask on the previous slide is the configuration that you mentioned. Is that the same configuration that's applicable for the different license metrics that we support in SAM? So in other words, you set it up once kind of thing?
Say that again.
So like we have engine measurement, we have named user.
Yep.
Will I get both of those data sets and that data through the one time I set up that ABAP program?
Yeah, it's a single setup, and then you just like our SaaS, just like any other integrations, there's really nothing you have to do there unless you see that you're not getting data for a particular system or something like that. Then you may have to go back and take a look if there's any errors. But yeah, it's for both named user and engine. The only difference is for self-declared, you will create those in ServiceNow directly. It won't come in through this integration. So self-declared is the only one that there is some additional work on the ServiceNow side.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. All right, let's jump into SAP licensing, because I know we talked about engines and we talked about named users. I'm going to set up a scenario, Akash, if you will, and then I'd like you to maybe speak to it. And if we get a chance to, I'd like to jump into the product. So It's very common when I meet with customers and they're working on SAP, I come across a SAM admin who wants to reconcile their compliance for named users, right? So they approach me and they say, hey, Victor, our business outcome is that we have to be compliant with our SAP named user licenses so that when audit comes around, we're reconciled and we're in a good spot. So from their perspective, they essentially need to calculate active SAP users across systems and compare that to their license count. Effectively, what they're asking me is, how do I create an effective license position where I can optimize or take action, right? So what would you say to an individual in that scenario looking at named user licenses?
Yeah, so on the SAP side, you're absolutely right. You've got to be able to consolidate that across systems. So you're going to run a USMM on the SAP side, and that's going to get you, all of the different data elements from each individual system. And we kind of do the same thing on the ServiceNow side, where we're going within that particular system. We're capturing the users and their user type and so on and so forth, bringing that into the central system and then pulling that data into ServiceNow. So when you see the reconciliation, when you do that license position, it's going to look across those systems and then identify the highest value across those systems for that particular user from a named user license perspective. So it'll select the highest named user type, and then that is what gets applied to that license position. So a lot of the things that they're going to have to do on the SAP side, as far as pulling that in and into a law report and so on and so forth, they still have to do that. This allows them to see that on an ongoing basis within ServiceNow, so there's no kind of surprises at the end, kind of thing.
Yeah. What does this look like in the product?
Sure. So let me steal share here real quick.
Yeah.
And I'll share this. So when we're looking at from a reconciliation standpoint, again, within the workspace, you're going to go to the SAP publisher pack. Within that named user, this is similar to just about anything else that we have where we're identifying software models and so on and so forth. This groups it by named users, and then you'll have all your different named user licenses from a license metric perspective identified here. So let's see if we can get that to pull up here. So what you'll see is you'll have the named user identified here. So SAP Application Professional. How many do we own from a entitlement perspective? So if we take a look at our entitlements, we have 90 rights. And then, what are we using within that we've captured data-wise from all those individual systems? And then what you'll see is, even though we have 139 SAP users, we are consolidating that, and we're identifying who's been licensed and not licensed, and so on and so forth. But you can see those 139 users, you can see those across systems here, and then what they, who they are, and so on and so forth. So you'll be able to kind of see that data in ServiceNow as well. So that's, from a license position perspective, that is from a named users, that is the type of data that we'll be pulling in into ServiceNow. On top of that, we also have, we go to our analytics. We do have, for named users, we do have different optimizations, and I think we're going to get into this later, but this is also where a lot of that data is utilized as well, is within the optimizations themselves.
That's awesome. And again, just to play it back, the named user piece, you say that if a user has a different role or type in different systems, we're counting the highest most role or type, so that yep, they're licensed by the highest role. So it's kind of like a watermark, if you will.
Exactly.
Highest watermark. Okay, great. So if you have any questions on named users, feel free to throw those in the chat. We'll get to those. Let's jump into engine licenses. There's a little bit more information here that we should cover. So Akash, again, I'll set up the stage here. Customer comes to us and says, hey, my business outcome is I want to be compliant with my engines, again, to mitigate any risk exposure that I have to audits. So to do that, I need to calculate the number of SAP engines that I have and compare that to my license count. And ultimately, I need an effective license position. I need a point in time perspective letting me know if I'm over or under so I can take action. What can you say to that?
Yeah, kind of the same thing. Again, we're that ABAP code is going across systems. It's pulling that data into ServiceNow. We're able to see the engine usage by system in ServiceNow as well, and so we'll consolidate that data. And then you're basically, from a license position report, you're going to go against what you've defined as your entitlement of usage for that engine data. And then it's going to calculate in the SAP engine usage table, calculate all those records, and then be able to show you the license position and where you are. We also have a couple of indicators. One where if you're 90% within the range of 90% or higher on an engine usage, it'll call those out specifically. And then any unused engine. So let's say you have entitlements that have been created for specific engine measurements, software models. If we find no usage for that, we'll identify those unused engines. Now, it doesn't mean that they're truly unused, but you may have an issue with the data that's being pulled from that particular RFC connection, for some reason something might have gotten turned off or whatever, for us to be able to pull that data, or you're truly not using that particular, and so that gives you just something. Maybe you can utilize it for a trade-in or something, when you're negotiating with SAP. It's difficult to take it off completely, but if you're gonna not use it anymore, maybe there's something else that you can purchase.
Yeah, at least you said it. Like, at least what you're saying here is it makes you aware that something may not be used or may not be used at full capacity, or the highest utilization that you're measuring. So you may want to take some action around that. You made a comment earlier about production clients. I just want to kind of resurface that here for this slide. What was that comment around production clients?
Yeah, so we'll pull all of your different clients, system clients, into ServiceNow. But when we do the reconciliation for engine licensing, we're doing that only against production systems. So we will identify those engine records specifically for production, and then that's what you're going to end up seeing on the ServiceNow side. Okay, and I can actually kind of just quickly share as well. Mm-hmm. So let's take this back. So if we go back to our license usage under SAP, let's see, I probably should have figured out which one I wanted to utilize first, but let's see if we have any records in here. So if we'll see, we have certain engine measurements identified. This license required here. This is where you're going to see across systems how much we are using for those particular licenses. So in the case of this one here, we've got this engine. These are engine usage records. So we can drill down into this, and that is going to show us our engine usage record from what system, the software model that's associated, and then the engine usage of that particular for that client. So that's really what we're looking at, similar to if you're drilling down into something that's software installations and you click on the licenses required, it's going to show you all the different software installations and who's using it and so on and so forth. This acts the same way, except it's just going to show you engine usage records, or in the case of named users, it's going to show you those users that we gathered from SAP. So same concepts that we utilize within this license required link. As far as engines that have reached 90% or above, again, this is just an indicator. You can drill down into that, and then you can take a look at some of that data as well here to see from which system, which measurements themselves, and so on and so forth. We are reaching that threshold. You can change this as well if you want to be, at a lower mark or whatever. You can update this. It's an indicator for this particular widget. And then lastly, if we go back to our analytics, we also identify any unused engines also. We'll also probably just take a second here and just go through the software model for, let's say, a self-declared engine. So if I just quickly, I'm already on this particular software model, but if we take a look at this one's the license metric for small plants, so anything defined as 500 or less employees at a particular plant is considered a small plant, and then you just identify what's my software entitlement, how many of those am I allowed. And then from a usage perspective, this is where you would click off of that software model. You would identify that here. We'll just put in the name. Let's say, November 2022. And then what is my count of that? So I might have, 5 of those, whatever. So I'll go ahead and submit that. And that's your engine, that's your self-declared engine usage for that particular, for that self-declared engine measurement.
Got it. And then that's there for reconciliation purposes, or is it just there for your visibility purposes?
No, it is there for reconciliation. In fact, I think I ran this yesterday for what we had previously.
Ah,
So it does get reconciled, so I just added another 5, so that would have
yeah,
popped into here if we run reconciliation now. But this will actually pull in those what it is pulling for those reconciliations. This is that record.
got it.
In my case, I created a second one for 5 here, but this is showing me the one that I created yesterday.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so then you have it in one place as well, where you can look at all of your SAP named users, engines, and self-declarations in the same spot.
Yep.
Fantastic. So let's look at this next slide here. It's a engine flow, engine measurement flow. And I just want to walk through this. Is there anything that you mentioned that we didn't cover that we should point out when it comes to measuring engines?
Yeah, I think I think we've kind of hit on all points. We're going to have the ABAP program gather those engine measurements. It's going to create the software models on our side, and then obviously we will continue to kind of track that. It pulls it on a weekly basis. It's going to gather different measurements on a weekly basis, and then pull that into ServiceNow automatically. And then we'll be able to kind of see where we are over time from an engine measurement perspective. So really, it's generating those entitlements, knowing what we should be at, being able to see the data coming in on a periodic basis, being able to monitor that data, and then reporting off of it going forward.
Okay. All right. Now, what about, because I get this question sometimes about indirect access. Is that something that's particular to SAP? And what could you comment around that?
Yeah, so when we're looking at indirect access, really, we're looking at systems users that are logging in from third-party tools, things like that, that may be querying SAP, may write some data to SAP, and so on and so forth. Maybe there's multiple concurrent users, that are utilizing that connection. So those are the kind of things that SAP is looking for from an indirect access perspective, which can get expensive. So either you need to apply a named user type associated to it, or you need to pay for digital access. And again, all of these things, if they're just creeping up on you, that could be expensive. And it's difficult to kind of see that on the SAP side. So what we're doing is through PA Spotlight, we do have the ability we have criteria that we've set automatically out of box. Customers can go and update that criteria. They can, change thresholds and things like that. But basically what we're looking to doing is identifying that indirect access. And I think there was a couple of widgets where we do show on the reconciliation dashboards for potential indirect access from user activity, and then potential indirect access from a transaction activity perspective.
I see. And so if I had this displayed on my side, what would I do with this information?
So this is definitely something that you want to work with your SAP teams, and I will say just across the board, our SAP integration is pulling data from SAP. We do not write data back to SAP. And again, mainly for this type of indirect access and taking up licenses and so on and so forth. So we don't write anything back. So this is definitely something that you can drill down into these, you can get these records, and show the usage, so show what clients it's coming from, what's the system name, or the username, and so on and so forth. That that have these user activities or these transactions, and then report that back to the SAP and figure out what you want to do, and kind of dig into that a little. But it gives you some insight, which is kind of the main issue.
A place to start, if you will.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So we talked about SAP from an overview perspective. We talked about how to configure it. We looked at licensing. We looked at the product. Now let's talk about optimization. So this is not just being compliant, right? Once you're done and you're compliant, now it's about How do you save additional cost for the business? So you can walk us through optimization just at a high level, and then let's focus a little bit on SAP.
Yeah, so ServiceNow just in general, right? Like with all the different publisher packs that we have, customers are asking for, and we're trying to provide as much from a optimization perspective that we can. So whether it's Microsoft, Oracle, IBM, things like that, we do have some optimization, either dashboards, indicators, or in certain cases, guided set up playbooks for those optimizations, and we're continuously coming out with more. Specifically around SAP is no different. We do have optimization set up for the named user licenses, based off of roles and transactions. We've got optimizations or indicators to identify any inactive users or locked out users. Anybody that has a named user or is a dialogue user that is missing a named user assignment, and then engines that, like we talked about, unused engines or engines that are reaching 90% of the entitlement, and so on and so forth. We identified those as well. So these are things to be able to. Some of these are low-hanging fruit things. Some of these are, hey, we need to be able to monitor, similar to those indirect access kind of things. We need to be able to consolidate and monitor that data, so we can make any recommendations back to the SAP team.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing to note here is, as part of our newest UI workspace that we released back in San Diego, there's a central place where customers can navigate and identify all of their optimization opportunities.
Yep. So I think within Tokyo, like if you go to the software asset analytics page, and then on the tab for optimizations and savings, we do have 3 specific publishers that we have where we have these specific publisher optimizations. SAP, Microsoft, and I don't remember the last one, but SAP is one of them, and you're going to go ahead and drill down into the SAP one. This is where you will see specific widgets that apply only to, in this case, SAP.
Yep. So let's walk through some of those optimization opportunities, right? So I think I've identified 7.
Yep. So inactive users, just like it says. So we use 90 days. Customers can update those indicators if they want to reduce that number of days or increase those number of days, but or if they have certain additional filters that they need to apply based off of those users, they can do that as well. But basically, we're looking at inactive users that have a named user assignment, and we want to make sure that either if they're not using it, that they, those roles are removed from that particular user as well. Here we've got SAP users without a named user assignment. So through transactions, we've seen activity, but they're not actually, there's not a named user assignment associated to them. These we want to make sure that we're calculating correctly, because this could result in utilizing the default named user assignment on the price list, and that is typically the most expensive one. Locked out users, again, from an SAP perspective, these are users that have been locked out of all the systems that they have they're associated to, that we're seeing a locked out user, and they are consuming a license as well, some sort of dialogue user that is consuming a license. So we just want to make sure that if they're not using it, that if they're locked out, that they get unlocked, or we remove that access. Non-dialogue users with a named user assignment. So these are system users or something like that, where we don't have or we do have a named user assignment, which we shouldn't in that case. So We just want to be able to clear that up and make sure that we're not consuming an additional license that we don't need to.
Right. How about number 5 here?
Yeah, and then this is for role-based optimization. There is a little bit of setup that is required. You do need to identify. We typically tell customers to kind of go with their most expensive ones first, but you do need to do some mapping between the roles and the named user types. And based off of that, we can take a look across the multiple systems, what roles have been assigned to a user, and see if they have if there's a cheaper named user assignment that could be utilized for that particular user.
Awesome. Those number 6 and 7.
Yeah.
Tell me about.
Yeah, transaction-based ones. These are again, from a setup perspective, there is a reclamation rule that needs to get created. Identify, what transactions, minimum transactions you're looking for that user, and if they fit that criteria, then we would identify a possible transaction-based optimization for that particular user.
Fantastic. And the last one there, like you said, unused engines. If there's any that you need to make activity on or action on, talk to SAP regarding those.
Yeah, whether that's something that we're truly not using anymore, and we can add that to our negotiation discussion, or if it's something that we have an issue with, we may want to talk to our SAP team to see if that RFC connection got inactivated for some reason.
Fantastic. Great. Well, so this is what it looks like in the dashboard again, right? You can click into those. Yep. I would imagine you can click into each of those tiles, and it would give you the unique records for all of those inactive users or licensed non-dialogue users, right? It'll list those details out. Great. All right. So Akash, big thanks for handling that for us. I want to see if there's any questions out in the Q&A form. Michael's going to help us with facilitating those questions.
Yeah, gentlemen, great job. That was a great conversation and really thorough. We have a good amount of people on for today, so thanks everyone for joining. I'll read this first question here from Tom, but keep the questions coming. So Tom wants to know, is the ABAP part of the Tokyo release, or is that a purchase add-on for SAM Pro?
Yeah, so when you purchase SAM Pro, you get you get all the publisher packs that are associated to it. And then the ABAP program is downloadable from the ServiceNow store, and that is included with your SAM Pro purchase. It is not an additional purchase.
Awesome. Somebody messaged me while we were talking, Akash, and the question was, once I have the data coming in through the ABAP program, do I start with named user or do I start with engines? Is there an order of operations? Is there a recommended approach? I guess if we were to expound on that, what is the best method?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a tried and true, like simple, hey, you should always start with this and so on and so forth. I think engines are probably easier in the sense of because we're creating those engine measurement records and you're generating a software entitlement for it, and your reconciliation just kind of happens at that point. Named users, because we have optimizations and so on and so forth, that may take a little more setup on the named user. If we want to utilize like role-based optimization or transaction-based optimization, you're probably going to spend a little more time on the named user side.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I guess another way to look at this is, can customers set up multiple ABAP programs? Let's say they have different systems across their environment. Sure. Is that possible? And if that is possible, then maybe to answer the other person's question, maybe you start with the smallest system, right? Just so that the data set is a little bit more manageable. Maybe that's another way to look at it. And then expand into your larger footprint. Just a suggestion. I don't know, Akash, no. You can validate if that's
that
true.
Makes sense. If they do have multiple systems, across organizations or whatever, definitely start with one. Maybe get your feet wet. We talk about it with SAM Pro and just in general. Crawl, walk, run. Try and just get that process down. Understand the data that's coming in, and then utilize that to repeat that process across across your SAP instances.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Any other questions out there, Michael?
Yeah, we have one from Philip. I was multitasking in the chat. You didn't address this one yet, did you, Victor?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, let me read it out then. So Philip wants to know, what about different license types for a single publisher? How is optimization represented for various licensed product models?
Different license types for a single publisher. I'm not sure I understand the question specifically, but if we do have, let's say for different models, if we do have different license metrics per model, so we still, on the entitlement, you can have the same software model, but across those different software models, we might have different, and not necessarily in the case of SAP, but let's say Microsoft or something like that, something maybe per user, something maybe per device type license metrics. You can do that across models, and we do reconcile those differently. So we will look at that entitlement. We'll create two separate license metrics, license metric results for the same model, and then reconcile that based off of how you've defined it. So hopefully that is what the question was about.
Sure, and if not, the individual can reach out to us. Feel free after the session, and we can clarify anything.
Especially Oracle.
Especially, yeah.
I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I do see a good question here. Can you do this type of training for other publishers like Adobe, Microsoft, Oracle, especially Oracle? The answer is yes. It is part of our roadmap, if you will, when it comes to these live events. We're picking and choosing different publishers. We did do one from Microsoft not too long ago. So if you are looking for the Microsoft recording, we actually do have that on the community. But we will be expanding into other publishers to do something very similar. Thanks for the question. All right.
Great. Sorry, I sent the incorrect PDF in the chat. I'll be sending an SAP related PDF shortly. Paul wants to know, is there any cost on the SAP side for this integration? And do you find your other customers that the benefits of enabling this outweigh the cost to license? We also have SuccessFactors licenses and CPEA licenses. Can I capture anything from them as well?
Yeah, so as far as the integration itself, there is no, even on the SAP side, there's no licensing costs, specific licensing costs there. So what we're looking at is, because we're also not writing anything back to SAP. We're just reporting and bringing that into ServiceNow. So there should be no indirect access type of or digital access type of cost associated to it. So at least that I've heard from customers specifically, based off of multiple contracts that they might have across those different customers. So as far as SuccessFactors, and so I know today we are looking at an integration for SuccessFactors to be able to gather that information and license that. I don't believe that is supported as of today. And then CPE Fiori, that is also, I don't believe that is currently supported either.
Got it. There's one more question here in the Q&A form. Does the ABAP interface require a named user license, and what type?
Yeah, no. So again, from a SAP perspective, I don't believe so. It is I have not heard that our ABAP program integration requires an SAP named user license.
Okay.
I've in the ones that we've dealt with, going forward, like all the different customers and so on and so forth. When we've gone to set this up, that's never been brought up.
Yeah, I've experienced the same when working with customers. That hasn't shown up. Okay.
All right. Well, thanks, gentlemen. Those are good questions. This recording, as I said in the chat, will be posted on the event page in a couple of days. And we're now going to review some trainings and resources available to you on the community page and be sending out some links. So thanks for the great questions.
Yep. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. All right, so if you want more information about what we discussed today, we also recommend that you take some related trainings, right? These are fundamental to understanding SAM, not just for SAP, but for everything related to SAM. So starting first with the fundamentals training, SAM fundamentals, a lot of you have probably already taken that. It's a good place to start. In fact, we highly recommend that you start there. But if you want to add more expertise around certain areas like entitlements, normalization, discovery, and reconciliation troubleshooting, there's a couple of other free, they're nothing longer than like 10, 15 minutes each module. But these are really good concrete trainings to help support what you already know in SAM fundamentals. Adding to that, there are some white papers and guides. So some of the things that Akash talked about today are covered in two areas. We have a white paper called Managing SAP Named User Licenses. And then we have another one that is a KB article, but we've also provided the PDF in the chat here to SAP integration with ServiceNow software asset management. So again, talking about engines, talking about how to configure everything, those two documentations will help you with that. And then the import entitlement guide is just another document that helps you bring in entitlements or teaches you how to bring in entitlements into SAM after you've set up your SAP configuration. All right, and last but not least, we mentioned it, but the ITAM community is a great place to get a lot of this information, recordings from other live events that we had, our Getting Started guide, which has a lot of links to other resources and areas where you can set up on how to be successful with SAM. And then again, a list of those trainings that I mentioned earlier. So I want to thank everybody for their time, for joining us today. Akash, thanks again as always. Appreciate you being here for us. And to the audience, thanks for the questions. We hope you had a good, successful presentation with us, and we'll catch you in 2023. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.